So to start manipulating it, go to, let's say, the ceiling, expand its properties. Along with the normal transform property, there's also now a material option that we'll see a little later when we're using lights. For now, just expand transform, and the values of position and scale. And now rotation is broken up into 3 parameters, and orientation is a new parameter as well. And that means now not only do you deal with the X and Y, but also the Z for positioning. Z pushes deeper into the screen or closer to the screen. Let me set that back to 0. To move this and rotate it like a room, I'm going to select the floor, and under its orientation, and if you roll over this little arrowhead, it tells you which axis. Z is coming at us, Y is going up, and X. So I want to rotate this along the X axis, but I don't want the pivot point to be here. I want the room's floor to rotate around its base way back there by where it connects to the wall. So using the anchor point and pan behind tool, I'm going to move that, and turning on snapping, I'm going to move that anchor point all the way to the base of the wall, and you'll feel it snap right there. I'm going to pick up the move tool again, and now going to orientation, I want to rotate this along the X axis. And let me switch to the floor. And now I'll start to spin things up along the x-axis. So a positive number rotates it this way, and a negative number going lower, dragging to the right, rotates it backwards, and dragging it to the left, rotates it forward. Now the number should be a multiple of 90. So it either would be 90 degrees or negative 90 degrees. And if it's negative 90 degrees, 360 minus 90 is 270. I'll do the same thing for the ceiling. Selecting the ceiling, using the pivot point pan behind tool, I'll drag it to the top of the wall. I'll expand the ceiling's orientation. And for its orientation, if this was negative 90 this way, which is 270, this means the ceiling should be 90 degrees towards us. And you can see a little perspective happening here. Now that I have the ceiling and the floor rotated, you can see the table is going right through and lower. Let me pull this up, and I'm going to use the move tool. Let me just close this. I'm on the desk layer, and I'm going to roll over. Wait until you see the cursor change into a dark cursor with the letter of the axis, and you know you're rolling over that axis, and then click and drag this upward. I'll do the same thing for the chair. I'll click on the chair layer. I'll click when I see the Y, and I'll drag it upward as well. And now that's distributed in 3D space. But how can you tell 3D space? We need to add a camera to this scene. I'm going to go into Layer, New, Camera. Accept the default camera. If you want to give it a good name, maybe Room Camera. All the other defaults are fine, and I'll click on OK. How to see this camera? Off over here, where it says one view, select two views. I'm going to zoom out of this viewport, and now we see what the camera is seeing here. If I click on this camera, and I move it, right now I clicked on the camera and its pivot point, and we could now have an easy way to pan around the room like this. So if I just want to do an animation where something like this happens, one way would be to animate the art, and that's a valid way. From a camera point of view, I can just select both the point of interest and the position keys here, go to another frame, and click and drag. Now you create this sliding animation. Let me move that a little closer. If I go up here to the camera icon, here are some interesting things we could do with the camera. The orbit, track XY, and track Z. And by pressing the C key, C as in camera, you will cycle through these different tools. So let's explore these tools. This is the orbit tool, and when I click in this viewport and drag it around like this, you can see that the room is now in dimension. But the desk is flat to the wall, and since we didn't do anything to make the desk dimensional, it always will be flat. I'm going to select the desk, and I'm going to roll over this axis for the desk until it says Z, and I'm going to pull it forward so it's no longer flat to the wall. And I'm going to do the same for the chair. Go to the chair, wait until you see the axis, and pull it a little off the wall like that. Now when I select the orbit camera tool, you'll be able to get some animation happening like this. Let me set it straight. And as I rotate, you see these numbers are changing. So if I want to reset this, I'll just hit reset for the camera, and that brings the camera back to its initial view. I'll now go to the track view. I'm pressing the C key twice until I see track along the Z axis. And I'll click and I'll push in. This will be the shot that you're going to be dealing with. Let me go back to the final room, and I'm going to drag this room here. I'll also click to make it a 3D layer. And by doing so, all the 3D that's happening in here will also be able to manipulate with its own camera out here. Let me go back to the room. So if I don't want the camera in this room, I'm going to take this camera and cut it, which is Command X or Control X. I'll go to my final room. I'll press Command V for paste. I'm going to pick up the orbit tool, C key until I see this. And when I drag it around, it's flat. That's because you need to rasterize this layer in order to project that 3D-ness upward and be able to manipulate it out here in the main timeline. So if you have a composition that's a 3D layer like this, and then you want to import that composition into another composition, in order to see it 3D, you have to do two things. One, you have to click on the 3D layer icon right here, so this layer becomes 3D, and you have to click on here to rasterize this layer into a 3D comp space. So why have the camera out here and not in here? Just for the sake of manipulating a whole scene camera, it's okay to have it in here and animating here. Nothing's wrong with that. But if you're talking about a global view for your scene, maybe you want your camera out here. Like before, I had this camera within here, like this, and I just moved it out there by cutting it and pasting it. You don't need a camera in order for the scene to be 3D. You can see by looking at the extremes of the bounding box of this art that it is in this 3D perspective. The camera is used to control the view in 3D space. I'm going to set up the scene. I'm going to reorbit this, and this will be a simple push into the scene. And when we add in the light, it'll look a lot more impressive. We'll start it here. Now my artwork needs to be extended. When you're creating your artwork, whether it's Photoshop, After Effects, or using Real Photograph, make sure to extend it more than you need. It's okay to extend it in here. I'll go to the room. I'll go to the ceiling. And for its scale, I'll press the S key. I want to scale it along the Z axis more towards us. I'll turn off constrain proportions, and I'm going to roll over. The axis that's pointing out at me is the one where I want to constrain it to. Now, it would have been the Z axis, but this was rotated 90 degrees, so the axis facing out towards the camera is the Y axis now. So X, Y, and we'll constrain proportion off. I'll just increase that. much as I need. So eyeball it. You can see it's going beyond the canvas, and here it's beyond, and that's good. I'll do the same thing for the floor. I'll type in a number like 500. I'll go to the floor, and I'll do the same thing. So selecting the floor, or moving the cursor over the axis to make sure you pick the correct axis, and it is the y-axis again. I'll open up its scaling property. I'll uncheck the constraint proportion, so X, Y, and I'll type in 500. And that extends the floor outward as well. Going back to the final room, now the artwork extends beyond the floor. If I zoom out, this is the insanely large room we created, but that's okay. We don't have to care about that extra artwork. Now when I rotate, using the orbit tool, we're not going to see those edges.